Welcome to the Bridge the Gap podcast. Here's your host, Dustin Udke.
Everybody, welcome into another episode of Bridge the Gap. We got a great episode tonight. I know there's nothing else that you could even debate watching tonight other than this show right here. We're going to be talking all things reactions, overreactions, underreactions, how we handle taking all the information from week one, what to do with it, how to properly and adequately gauge it in terms of how you move forward in fantasy football. And I couldn't think of a better person to bring on for this. You can find him at Fantasy Pros on Dynasty Junkies. He's an NFL all-day collector, cigar aficionado, one of the most staunchest defenders you can find out there. The guy who always has the right amount of reaction, Andrew Hall. Andrew, welcome in. Thank you for coming on Bridge the Gap. How are you tonight?
Doing great, Dustin. Thanks so much for having me, and glad to be here. I know that it was a big debate in my head about how we were going to start this off. I like that you answered that question very easily for us. That was great.
Yeah, and so check out Andrew. Andrew, before we get started, tell everybody where they can find you, what you got going on this season, and all the great stuff you got going on.
Sure thing. Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter or X. I always call it Twitter. I'm not going to change. At Andrew Hall FF. I do all of my writing at this point is at Fantasy Pros, always for free. You can find my stuff there. It's always my pinned tweet. You can always find it from my profile. Doing a lot of dynasty stuff for them, trying to do some, what things are happening this week, what things should be happening next week, kind of stuff. I'm going to be doing 2 articles a week this year, kind of seeing what dynasty stashes to have, and then just taking a look at some of the trending players and seeing what is happening and why maybe that is happening. I think a lot of people get the obvious ones, but we're going to try to go a little deeper and maybe explain why that might be something you want to look at or maybe add in your league if they didn't get at it already. And then, of course, like you mentioned, I'm on Dynasty Junkies. I just did a couple episodes this summer, taking the month of September off pretty much just by scheduling and everything else going on, which is great. But the show continues on without me. So definitely tune in there, and you can follow that at Dynasty Junkies on Twitter. And then we tend to go live during the right around halftime of the Thursday night football game. So if you're looking for something to do at halftime, come tune in and get some dynasty advice for some of the best in the industry. So yeah, other than that, just hanging out, just trying to enjoy the season and trying not to overreact.
Yeah, other than those 8 things you just rattled off, and Andrew's Twitter handle and the Dynasty Junkies will be scrolling at the bottom of the screen all show. So drop them a follow. If you're not following Bridge the Gap on Twitter, please do that. BTG_PodFF. Andrew, we like to start most weeks off here with a game.
What exactly is the game?
Well, it is not a quiz or a trivia contest, nor is it a test of brute strength or athleticism. At its core, it's just a children's game, and I would wager that some of you here this evening have played Would You Rather?
Classic Would You Rather. I get them for most weeks. So if you're watching this, feel free to answer in the comments over on YouTube, on the Bridge the Gap YouTube or the Dynasty Bros YouTube. Since we're talking all things week one and the information that pours through, I got a Would You Rather for you, Andrew. Would you rather, you're a Bengals fan, go to every Bengals game, but have no information on what else happened in the NFL that day? So all you get is what's happening at the Bengals game. So you are there for, an hour beforehand, the 3-4 hours of the game, and maybe an hour afterwards as you get home before you get any information. So you have no other information than what you saw at the Bengals game. You can do that every week. So we'll fly you to wherever you need to go for away games. You'll go to every Bengals game. Or would you rather have the ultimate home setup? So you can have multiple screens with all the octo boxes, or you can have 16 screens with every game on a big screen. You can have a 17 screen with all the data information pouring in, stats, scores, red zone, whatever it is, whatever that ultimate setup is for you at home. What would you rather have, the single game experience or all the information?
Well, this one's, I feel like I'm kind of cheating at this one. I have season tickets to the Bengals and I get to go to all their home games as it is. I think if you're going to fly me to all the away games, I would sacrifice all the other information. There's really nothing better than kind of getting into a single game. I love Red Zone. I definitely watch Red Zone or, watch the Octobox kind of stuff on away games. Or I'll go to like a BW3s or, this week I'm traveling for work. Like I've always got, different things happening in life. So I don't mind going and kind of seeing a different experience, but I love going to a game, man. There's just nothing better than like sitting there and enjoying that, whether you're home or away. So as much as I love, staying home and enjoying a nice, ultimate home setup would be good for other things too, like for movies and TV shows during the off season and whatever, like having friends over, but yeah, man, I would love to go to every game. And then honestly, I don't check my phone as much anyway, but when kickoff happens, it's kind of like, All right, all the work is done. Let's see how it goes. And it's kind of nice to have that liberation and not checking the other information that's happening. So, yeah, I definitely. It seems like an easy one, I guess, but I definitely want the Bengals stuff.
Yeah, see, for me, so I am not close to an NFL team. The Packers are 3 hours away. Bears are 3 hours away. I'm a Bills fan, which is like, the 16-hour drive away. So I don't get to go to many NFL games. I went to one last year with who went to a Packers game. I agree. Going to a game is something special.
Mm-hmm.
But what I think makes it special for me is the people around you, whether you're going with the friends or just being in a stands of other passionate football friends, especially if you're all rooting for the same team. And I think a home setup for me would include something like that. It wouldn't just be like a recliner. It'd be like theater seating where I can invite all my friends over who watch football and be like, "Hey, my house is the football hub. Come here. We're gonna have every
Come
game.
hang out. Yeah.
We're gonna have a popcorn machine. We're gonna have a little hot dog roll. We're gonna have all that." Excuse me.
Bless
We're gonna have all that. So to me, that's part of what I love about football. I love the community aspects of it. So I might take the ultimate home setup. I agree. I enjoy just locking in, especially on a Bills game. Just locking in and watching. I usually have my computer open just so I can see kind of who scores. I am not a red zone fan. If you like NFL red zone, more power to you. For me, it's just not what I like. I like watching a game. I like seeing the flow and the momentum changes. I want to see what happens on 1st and 10, not just when they're in the red zone. I want to see what happens when kickoff. I want to see all these plays. I want to see the sacks. I want to see the second down and what do they do on 2nd and 4 or 2nd and
Yeah.
6 or 3rd and 15. I want to see those things because that tells me more than just seeing what they do in the red zone when they're about to score. So I get what you're saying about the game, but I think I might just take the ultimate home setup and allow all my friends in the area to come over and just hang out and watch football.
I dig that. I really do. But I feel like, especially at home games, and this is my 5th year now being a season ticket member holder, like everybody around us is the same as always. And like, it's always nice to go back, and I don't ever see them other than at the stadium at this point, and there's the tailgating aspect, which I really enjoy. I don't do it every time, but sometimes it's nice for like, the Monday Night Football is our next game against the Commanders. That's going to be a fun tailgate right there. You know what I mean? Like I'll be out there smoking a cigar, Joe Burrow style, like kind of enjoying the weather. Hopefully it's still being good. So I'm looking forward to that. And just, there's nothing better than that live experience to me, but I do not hate it in the idea of like watching a full game. I like red zone only because of the fantasy aspect. Like there's no commercials, there's no stall. They can play 2 at a time. Like I kind of dig that. I don't mind watching a full game. Don't get me wrong. But when you're, on Sundays, especially when it's, 7 games at a time, I'm like, just throw it all at once and let's just see what happens. But I love those island games like Monday night or Thursday night where there's nothing else. There's no red zone. I can just sit there and watch the whole thing. You do get a much better picture of the actual game and kind of seeing how things ebb and flow. They'll go back and show replays on red zone. And like, here's the fumble that it takes everything out of context. It gets it all out of whack. Get the actual energy. So again, being live, that's all you get. I get to watch every game. I get to watch every down. I get to watch everything. And I love that. So it's a great question, but yeah, as a fan of in-person football, I got to choose that one.
I think if I lived close to a stadium and had season tickets like you do and could go every day, every week or every home game at least, and have that camaraderie and there's this concept of third place where you have home and work and what's your third place, and that could become one of my third places where I have friends that I just see at the stadium and they're in my section. My best friend had tickets, season tickets to the Eagles, and he really loved it. Like that was their section and they were all proud of that. I can see me swaying that if I had that more rarely. I just don't get it that often. So that's where I'm at. And part of why I asked that question, the why I have you on, is because you do get inundated with information every Sunday, even Thursday nights, even Mondays. You get this just overwhelming amount of information of who scored, who didn't score, who's got catches, who's got yards, who made the big play, who didn't, who got the sacks. Andrew, how do fans, and whether you're a seasoned fantasy football player or analyst like us, or you're new to fantasy football, or not even playing fantasy football, just in the NFL, how do you process all that information the right way?
Well, I don't know if there is a right way. I think that's a trick question. I like that.
Okay.
But I mean, there's a lot of ways to do it. And whatever way makes you the least anxious and the least stressed is the right way. And I know some people that is not analyzing it at all and just sort of, listening to a podcast and trusting their word. I know something that I tend to do, and I recommend this to anyone that's in a lot of leagues. It's using tools and making things take the decision off your plate, right? So I use a lot of my Fantasy Pros tools. My playbook is great. I actually just went through before we started tonight and kind of looked at some of my lineups, seeing who I was, who's injured now and who's, what's my weak spots. Like, do I need to go after a running back? Do I need to go after a receiver on waivers that are running soon? And I'll be looking at that after we're done. It's the blessing and a curse of being in so many leagues. But for me anyway, it's part of it is just, let's just have fun with it. And if you're not having fun with it, and I've said this to many, many people over the years, if you're not having fun with it, don't do it, right? If you're doing something that causes you stress or causes you anxiety, maybe it's time to think that over and say, well, maybe this isn't the way to do it for me. So in my world, what you're saying is like, what's the right way to do it? It's whatever way causes you the least amount of stress. If you've got a life and a family and kids and everything, and you can't get to waivers on Tuesday, you tried. Do your best. Put the lineup in for Wednesday for next week and just kind of play along. But I think ultimately, if you can use the tools to help simplify that process, or, come up with a way to check things or put things onto Twitter polls or whatever you feel like is best for you and let someone else take that pressure off, I'm always a fan of that.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I've said this a lot on this podcast, like fantasy should be fun. And if you're not having fun, you're not doing it right. And, so my son, who's 11, started a fantasy football league this weekend with his friends at school. And obviously, me being an analyst, he thinks he has a leg up, and he has one other friend, and her dad plays and her mom plays, and the other kids just have no clue. They know football, but they've never played fantasy. And we were talking today, and we drafted on Saturday. We aren't going to play week 1, just kind of the way things worked with timing with school. So we drafted. We had the second pick. We got Christian McCaffrey. So I said to him today, buddy, I said, hey, bud, just so you know, Christian McCaffrey's injured. He might not play next week. And he goes, yeah, my friend told me. And I said, okay. He goes, I'm really worried about their team. And I go, bud, doesn't matter if we win or lose, as long as you guys are having fun. Like, this is what it's about. It's about you guys being able to have something to talk about and kind of trash talk a little bit. Like, oh, your player got hurt, or I beat you. I said, that's what it's about. I said, you can have fun playing and lose, and that's okay. Yes, winning does heighten it and make it fun, but there's other ways to have fun than just winning. And trying to just instill that into a young age, like, have fun no matter what you're doing, whether you're winning or losing. And I agree with you. When I have this overwhelming amount of information coming in, it's whatever doesn't stress me out. Like, do I need to look at unrealized air yards and ADOT and assisted separation scores and all these newfangled stats? No, I don't need to. You can if you want to.
Yep.
At the end of the day, there's people like me and you, Andrew, that go out there and we put the work in and we watch game and we put up these scores and we do these analytical numbers and we put this stuff out and we tweet things out and we have graphs and charts and tools. I think you probably some really like use the tools that are out there. Find someone, a podcast, a Twitter, a couple people that you believe in their takes and you like the way that they back up their takes. Because if anybody's giving you takes and they're not backing up, that's not worth it. Just lean on them. Like, help is okay. Like, you don't have to figure it all out on your own, because I think that's part of it. But Andrew, when you are looking at information, is there a certain stat that you do like to use, or is there a certain stat that you just don't really care about?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. There's so many different stats out there. Like, there's so much noise and so little signal. And I think a lot of what I do is kind of what you said. And what I used to do a lot more of actually was listen to podcasts and start to understand the people that I trusted and kind of, see who backed their stuff up, who actually I felt like had a convincing argument, or who, laid out the facts and in a way that made me feel confident in their work or what have you. I know also I tend to do a lot more of the numbers side of things. I've got kind of more of an engineering math brain. And so I tend to feel more at home in Excel spreadsheets and numbers. So I tend to kind of be attracted more, I guess, to that kind of data. So that means I know my weakness then is film. I know my weakness is something that I need to look into more, and I'm not going to get better at film in theory unless I actually watch the film. But instead of doing that, what I end up doing is listening to guys like Matt Waldman and Christopher Harris and Zach Reed and these other guys that are actually watching the film, and then, dissecting that and kind of parsing what they find, and then taking what I think is important out of that to match it up with the numbers that I find important. I mean, honestly, it's as silly as it sounds, and it's kind of, I don't know, passe, I guess, at this point, but I tend to look at opportunity rate and like targets and things like that. Like, I don't really care I do care, I guess, if you go 3 for 8, like you catch only 3 out of 8 targets, but if they're giving you 8 targets, that usually is something pretty sticky. Drops don't tend to happen that often. So I feel like drops aren't very sticky. And now, again, there are outliers to everything, but I tend to look at opportunity and just like, well, how many snaps did this running back get? Or like, how many snaps was this tight end on the field for that were actually passing plays? Those kinds of things I feel like mean more to me because they just feel logically to me more sticky. But again, we're all trying to guess the future, and it's an impractical thing to even claim to be good at. So I always say you're throwing a dart blindfolded to a dartboard you don't even know exists. Like it's just we're just trying our best. And as long as you're having fun with it, it doesn't really matter if you hit the dartboard or not. Just give it a throw. You never know; it might hit.
Yeah, and I think me and you are very similar. Now, I am not a engineering math person, but I tend to have a lot more spreadsheets for things, and I look at opportunities as well in terms of snap percentages can be useful, but I don't really go by them. Routes run is a good one, but I look at targets per route run as kind of my guideline. So when I look at someone who's played a bunch of snaps, run a bunch of routes, but only saw 2 targets, that's worrisome.
Right.
When I see someone who's, playing a few snaps but getting targets every time they play, does that mean they're probably in line for more stats? And I tweet this and I say this a lot, that once is a fluke, twice is a trend, 3 times is a pattern. I'm willing to gamble on a guy at low cost on a trend, but I'm looking for patterns. So when I have a history of a guy playing high snaps but getting low volume, and not just a guy, I also look at systems. I'm a big believer that systems matter more than we put into it. So when I look at a guy, no matter how talented he is, if he is in a system that doesn't value that position or doesn't value what he's doing, a la the Bengals and a tight end, no matter how talented that tight end, the Bengals just don't utilize that in the current system they run. So as much as I love Mike Gesicki, does it matter? They're ready to give me Mike Gesicki, Irv Smith, Hayden Hurst, whoever they want to bring in. They just don't utilize them. I feel the same way with the Bills with Dalton Kincaid, and people have been bashing me for my Dalton Kincaid hate. It's just the system does not value tight ends. When he runs 25 routes and only gets 2 targets, and I watched all the 22 film and saw that he was open for majority of those targets, it's just not valued in that system. It's just not a 1 or 2 read in that system. And there's some other things I have issues with, but that's another thing. So I look at opportunities in terms of the system and what the system is providing.
Yeah.
Some systems in the NFL are run heavy, some are pass heavy, some are tight end heavy, some are, deep threat pass guys, some are short over the middle guys. Like when we talk West Coast offenses, those short intermediate passes. That's what I'm looking for. Like who fits in the system and is it repeatable? So when I look at some of these things, we'll talk about some of these players later. So stay tuned in. We're going to talk about a few players that are we believing them or not? That's where I'm at. And I tweeted this out a little bit ago, like the amount of hype you have for a guy that did really well should match the amount of despair you have for someone who did really bad. And I think we talked about this a little before the show. Like, if you're going to believe in a metric, you have to believe in it for everyone. So if you're going, hey, this guy ran a ton of routes and played a ton of snaps, and he's good because you weren't expecting that. When you see a guy who you were expecting more production from, but ran the same number of snaps and routes, then he still has to be good, because if that metric is true for someone, it's true for someone else, not based on your expectations. Is there any real information that you ignore, Andrew? Like you're just like, I don't pay attention to that. Like I hear it and I see it and I go, okay, on to the next one.
You know what's funny? The over the years, I think the one thing that I've started to ignore the most is healthy scratches. And by that I mean, if there's a player in week 1 that is a healthy scratch, like Dylan Lobb comes to mind, Jalen Wright, like some of these guys, right? Like just because they're a healthy scratch and they didn't get any stats does not mean you shouldn't be looking at them, especially in deeper leagues like dynasty leagues, right? Yeah. So I think sometimes that can be, at least in my opinion, where you can find some nuggets of gold, because sometimes people look at the snap count and it's 0. And we were just talking about how snap count and opportunity is everything. These guys didn't get an opportunity. That there might be more context and nuance to that, right? Yeah. So I don't just ignore zeros. I want to be like, well, did they suit up for the game and then didn't go in? That says a lot more than did they not suit up at all, because the coach is just thinking, hey, we have enough guys to go today. We got to make, last minute cuts to the roster on game day. So again, I think there's a lot of players like that, especially in the running back position, that I love pouncing on early. And I mean, and if there's going to be anything I take from week 1, it's like, who are guys that we can kind of get ahead of the curve on? And it's almost always running backs, because running backs just get worn down, unfortunately. For better, for worse, the running back position is kind of a beat them up, throw them away, try again next time kind of position. So I'd much rather have the 3rd or 4th running back on a team than the 3rd or 4th receiver, right? Like I'd much rather have a Dylan Lobb than a KJ Osborne. You know what I mean? Like just there's no value to me in a KJ Osborne. I'm rarely, if I'm going to start him, things have gone horribly wrong, but I'm rarely going to be excited about that output if I do start him, right? Like it's just, it's too high, it's too crazy. But if I'm starting someone like a Jalen Wright, for instance, this week is a prime example. Devon Achane and Raheem Mostert are both a little bit dinged up. No, we don't know how bad. We aren't sure yet what's going to happen, but that game is on Thursday, right? Like that game is an island game. There is a high likelihood that one of the two ends up sitting out just because it's early in the season. You got to worry about load management. Mostert's not a young kid anymore. Achan's a little younger, of course, but Jalen Wright, the rookie. I mean, I know my buddy Ronnie Evans, our buddy Ronnie Evans, big fan of Jalen Wright, been hyping him up all off season. I've got Jalen on a bunch of teams, and I think this is, I mean, again, speaking of that exact thing, right? Jalen Wright had 0 opportunity last week and could get 20 touches this week, like we saw Jordan Mason do on Monday. Like that, I wouldn't be shocked at that if things fall the right way. I'm not predicting it to happen yet. I'm just saying that's one of those guys that I would love to jump on and be ahead of the curve on. I just think that's where you get the most bang for your buck. So again, I'm ignoring some of the inactives, I guess. Some people look at that like they weren't good enough to start. No. It's not that. It's just sometimes you got to make some decisions, and they felt like they had enough running backs, and Dylan Lobb didn't get the chance, or Jalen Wright didn't get the chance. So I guess if that's anything, that's the one thing I'm ignoring, other than the obvious coach talk in a positive way, right? You almost always have to ignore positive coach speak. It just, it doesn't do you any good. You know, Tua Tagovailoa looked great out there today. Well, of course he did. You're not going to say otherwise. You know what I mean? Like he did look good. You know, things like that. But then you have to then not ignore the negative coach speak. When a coach is saying something bad, that's usually not a good sign. And they're not going to say something bad if they don't have to, right? Like that means something really might be bad. Unless I mean, those are the only things I look at. Well, yeah, but those are some of the only things that I really ignore, I guess, is positive coach speak, you know, and the kind of Bill Belichick stuff that we're used to hearing, where it says nothing, but he says everything. And then again, the inactives. Those are the things I tend not to look at too much.
Yeah, I liked your point on inactives, and I think that's where I come back to system and fit. So, perfect example this week was Roschon Johnson and Velus Jones. Roschon Johnson is, I think, a very talented running back, was inactive. Velus Jones was active, and I think is because the system needed someone on special teams.
Correct.
Now, Velus Jones then fumbled, I think, a punt or a kickoff, and we didn't see him back on special teams. So I think there's just as much likelihood that Velus Jones is inactive this week because they've replaced his need on special teams. And when they're going, hey, who do we want as a running back, Velus Jones or Roschon Johnson? They're going to take Roschon Johnson. They picked Velus Jones for his special teams work. And right, Dylan Lobby, who I love and I interviewed, you know, over the offseason, right, it could be, hey, do we take 4 running backs into the game and 6 wide receivers? That's probably ideal, but hey, maybe one of our 6 is banged up. We might need a 7th one, so we take a running back. That's where you got to look at this. I'm not overreacting on zeros. I don't look at drops. I don't look at
drops is another great one.
Even things like air yards and unrealized air yards and A dot, like those things are not sticky. When we say sticky, it means it's not it doesn't carry from one week to the other.
It's hard to be, it's not consistent. Like sometimes you might get a big outlier week or something, but touchdowns are not sticky either. And that's another one I tend to ignore too. If a guy got 3 touchdowns, the odds of him doing that again are very small. Like that has nothing to do with the previous week's performance. So,
but yeah, that's why I don't throw those out. Like I don't look at, you know, breakaway runs and broken tackles. Like broken tackles is a suggestive stat. Like whoever's grading that has to, like, it's not is that a broken tackle or a missed tackle? Like, was it even bothered? Like, is an arm a tackle, or is it like they're not all equal. Even interceptions to me are not equal until you watch the game film, because some interceptions, and I wish the NFL would do it very much like baseball. Like, I think we need to attribute interceptions to someone. Like, they're not always the quarterback's fault, right? Like sometimes it hits receivers and they pop it up in the air. Like I think we need to have someone like an error, assign that to someone, and so it's not always
I would love that. The amount of times that I've looked at either, you know, losing high points or losing a matchup by a couple of points because of an interception. It wasn't my quarterback's fault. Just it blows my mind.
Or like fumbles in the handoff. Yeah.
When it's like I think there was a game like 2 or 3 years ago. I'm trying to remember, but I think it was Lamar Jackson had 2 interceptions in a game, and both of them were bounces off of other things. Like one of them was off of his running back's chest. It just hit him so hard in the chest, it bounced off and the lineman got it. Yeah. And then the other one was like a pass to Andrews. He just kind of bobbled it. It went up in the air and a defensive got it. Just like those should not be attributed to negative points for Lamar Jackson. Like that's just, The other thing too, just while I'm on this rant for a second, I don't think kneel down should count against a quarterback for yards. Like I think that's a terrible decision where like if he takes a 3 down, like a 3-yard kneel down, like a negative 3 yards rushing, that shouldn't count. Come on. I've lost games with that too. So those are like the 2 things that I'm always just like, we got to have a way to counteract this. But yeah, it gets to be a little bit too personal, I guess, at that point. Like who's going to go through and do all that?
And tipped balls, right? If it's tipped to the line, intercepted, that's really not the quarterback's fault. the fumble on the exchange with the running back, like that always gets charged to the quarterback, never to the running back. The center hikes the ball too soon. That's all of a sudden a fumble for the quarterback,
Yeah,
and I don't know why. Like they never possess the ball there. So
or like a bad
those are things I wish
handoff.
they
Doesn't
changed.
that count as a
Yeah,
fumble too? I'm like, that's not
yeah,
the
that's a
running back.
fumble. Yeah,
Yeah.
and there's so many things that I wish they would do it differently, but that's a whole nother topic. I agree with you that we just can't always look at things in a nutshell, and not all things are equal. And so when we talk about reacting, we have the people who overreact, who take both good and bad, who take this, oh my gosh, Isaiah Likely outsnapped or outran and outscored Mark Andrews, so Isaiah Likely is the one. And that may be true. We don't have enough information and we overreact, but then we underreact, I feel like, on times with certain other things. Um, so how do you look at information and go, okay, here's a tempered, how do you temper yourself when you see these sort of things, whether it's good or bad, and not have these massive swings of over or underreaction?
Well, so overreacting is really easy to do. I think humans are maybe built to overreact, right? Like it's
Yeah.
so easy to see something and then put a pattern to it. That's how we're designed. It's evolutionary in our brains, right? Is that we start to see one piece of information, two pieces, now we make a pattern, we go with it. I think overreacting is really easy to do too when it's in your favor or vastly not in your favor, right? When
Yeah.
it's like, I won my week because of this. Oh man, that guy, Isaiah Likely is the guy, and I'm going to start him everywhere. I think there are definitely going to be people that are making decisions like, do I pick up Isaiah Likely and start him over Mark Andrews? And I'm like, I don't know if I would do that, but I understand why you want to. And depending on
Yeah.
your league and depending on what's going on, I could see that being a viable option. But let's not get crazy here. Like, I still think Andrews is the better asset. That being said, why do we not overreact? I think it's just, you got to put your thinking hat on and say, well, let's slow down. Let's think about this logically. Let's listen to other opinions. Let's look at the facts. Let's look at the data. I'm very much a fan of evidence-based and science-based thinking, right? And saying, okay, well, outliers exist. That's fine. I also think that there is some value in properly reacting. So you have to somehow react. You can't just
Yes.
ignore everything either, right? So I think that if there's enough drumbeat in the offseason and you start to see some, like Bengals, for instance, use this, like T. Higgins was injured. And I know myself and a lot of others was thinking, well, maybe Gesicki gets some of that volume. He did get some of that volume. He had a touchdown that was overturned in the end zone that they called not a touchdown. Tanner Hudson had a fumble at the 1 yard line. Otherwise, that game would have gone an entirely different direction, right? Joe Burrow would have had 2 touchdowns. He didn't have 2 touchdowns, though. That didn't happen. So it's not like you can look at that and say he should have, could have, would have, right? I mean, it's like it didn't happen. The points didn't get there. Okay, well, they'll be there next time, right? You can't always lose. You can't always win. And I think, too, if you just kind of keep an even keel, just kind of play the averages, play the numbers, keep grinding as if it doesn't matter. And I think Bill Belichick said it best. We're on to Cincinnati, right? Like, let's put it behind us. Let's not go crazy here. Let's just kind of think about what we need to do. That being said, the one thing I will say to this is, it's not always about you, right? It's about your league. Is your league a league that tends to overreact? Is your league the kind of league where, if you have Likely or Mason or somebody on your bench that you could get, I don't want to get crazy here, but let's say you could trade Jordan Mason to the CMC manager for like a Devonta Smith. Do that, right? Make that trade, right? Like, don't sit here and think, oh my God, what have I done? I just gave away Jordan Mason and he blew up last week. And go get the more steady asset, right? Like, I get some of the logic there. Now, again, that's just after one data point. In 3 weeks, that take might be terrible, right? And that's kind of where takes are not really my thing. I'm just thinking, what's the value right now? And if your league has value in some of this, if your league overreacts or underreacts, you need to know that and to be able to kind of plan accordingly for that as well. So that's kind of what I do. Is I don't try to take about it myself, but what can I help my league, or how can I use my league to my advantage?
Yeah, I think that's huge, right? It's taking what you have and knowing the situation you're in, right? If you're in a league and someone is going to be, if you're in a league with San Francisco 49er fans, maybe Jordan Mason has a lot more value, right? Or someone just got beat or someone lost because of Christian McCaffrey. Can you trade him for more? And I think you're right. I think we as humans are designed to react in a stronger negative way, and not just in football. Obviously we see it in other things, and it's going to happen a lot tonight with the debate going on. We have a tendency to see one thing and see that one data point and take it to the extreme of, all of a sudden, this person is the worst person in the world or this person is the best person in the world. We talked a lot of this at the Fantasy Football Expo of,
Oh yeah,
what's the history of this person or this thing, and does this one data point back that up or not? And what are there more than one data point? When we look at 1 week of football, or we look at one instance of a person's life, or one incident that happened, what does the history of them say it is? And I'm willing to bank on a history of something being good, like you said, Devonta Smith, versus the one data point of Jordan Mason. And I think that's where, as humans, we need to take a step back and not react. And we want to, part of it is jumping on the bandwagon when there's this overreaction of, see ya, and it's like, oh, I told you Jordan Mason was good. Yeah, pick up Jordan Mason, or pick up, like, right. Friday morning last week was all Isaiah Likely. Isaiah Likely, got to pick him up. He's the number one waiver guy. And then now it's Jordan Mason's the number one waiver guy. And we forgot about him, and we forget about Justice Hill, and we forget these other players that had good weeks that could be fantasy assets. We just take this one data point and we get tunnel vision, I find. So in the life, I think we all need to just take a step back and go, what other data points are there? And I think we need to look at other opportunities. I think we get very black and white with things of, this is either, I look at one thing and it's either this or that. And in reality, it's probably a range of outcomes.
So much gray.
And
yeah.
What do I think is the most likely? And how many, let's say if there's 4 outcomes, how many of them are positive? How many of them, maybe it is 50-50, maybe it's 3-1 positive. Okay, then go with the positive plan. Maybe it's 3-1 negative. Let's take Isaiah Likely. Outcomes are, he continues to be better than Mark Andrews. He's just as good as Mark Andrews. Mark Andrews becomes back to Mark Andrews, and Isaiah Likely goes back to what he is. Well, 2 of those are good. 1 is bad. What percentage of 100% is that 1? I think it's probably more like 60, 30, and 10.
Yeah, how do you weight them, right? They're not equally weighted. Yeah.
They're not equally weighted, and you have to weight them. And so I'm willing to add Isaiah Likely on my team if he's available and I have an open spot. Am I willing to start Isaiah Likely this week? Probably not.
I had 3 shares of Isaiah Likely. I didn't start him anywhere last week, and I'm probably starting him in all 3 this week just because the other option wasn't great either. Like in one league, I started Jonnu Smith over him because I'm like, I don't know what to expect, and Kansas City tends to shut people down, and that was a terrible decision, right? The other one, I think I started Cade Otton over him. I just thought Cade Otton, I just have this vibe that he's going to be good this year. He wasn't terrible this week, but he wasn't Isaiah Likely good. But when you look at it too, nobody was Isaiah Likely good. Like he was the only tight end to score over 15 points per reception scoring. Like nobody else scored more than 15 points. So it's kind of like he's the only one on the pedestal. There's no one else to look at for tight end. Tight end was just bleak this week. So I think that's part of where it comes down to too, is the context, the nuance, right? Like, are we spending everything for Isaiah Likely? Well, no, every tight end stunk. So let's not go crazy. I mean, yeah, go get him if you want, but don't blow your crazy fab on it. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I agree. So like in Scott Fishbowl, I did not start Isaiah Likely. And I end up looking at my roster for this week and I'm rolling him in and I'm taking out Romeo Doubs. Like no Jordan Love. Yeah. I will put Isaiah Likely in for the upside. And I think I managed to get I think I got Kamate Turpin in there because of the kicking upside.
Yeah.
And those are things where I'm willing to roll a dice. Yeah. And here's the thing with Isaiah Likely, everyone just goes, Isaiah Likely had a blow up game, and that is the one data point they're looking at. But you should be looking at multiple data points. It's what did he do last week, but who is he going against this week? Because he's not playing Kansas City again. He's playing someone completely different, and that's going to change how he does. Like, teams are going to adapt. Teams are going to look at what happened. He's playing Las Vegas. What did Las Vegas do against the tight end last week? That's how I look at it. So when I look at Isaiah Likely, and so like things like Baby Bowl or these one and dones for Scott Fishbowl, I go, okay, who did really well last week? Okay, Isaiah Likely did really well. I'm not looking to start Isaiah Likely. I'm looking to see who's playing Kansas City this week. Right, because Kansas City clearly couldn't stop the tight end. So that's the data point I'm looking at, not Isaiah Likely. I'm going, okay, if Isaiah Likely did good, can he repeat based on the matchup he has this weekend? Who does Kansas City play? Because that tight end might have a blow-up game. That's the data points. So there's, even in that one game we look at, there's multiple data points that shift things from week to week because they're not playing the same people. And I think that's where it gets lost in fantasy football. And I think in life, it gets lost in just this person did one thing and they're now the worst person in the world, where like they have a history of doing other things that are completely different, and everyone makes mistakes and we need to realize that, and people are going to have bad games and people are going to have good games, and we can't just rely on that. So what should a fantasy manager do? And you kind of talked to us a little bit. If you have someone on your bench that just had a blow up week, like an Isaiah Likely, like a Jordan Mason, what should we be doing? Should we be starting them? How should they handle those players? Because I think it's new. Let's say you're a new fantasy manager. It's your first year and you didn't know what you were doing. You happened to draft Jordan Mason because you drafted CMC in the first round, probably 101. You're like, I'll take the handcuff just to be safe because you heard that might be a good thing. What do you do with someone like that when you're playing fantasy football?
I think the first thing I ask when people ask me that question is I always want more context, right? And we were just talking about this before, like nuances, everything. I know people want like immediate answers or like in a vacuum answers. And I just don't think that's entirely fair because there's so many different ways that question can be answered based on your own roster. So I usually say things like, well, if you keep him, are you starting him this week? If the answer to that is yes, then keep him. Like, I don't think you're going to probably not going to get a starter for one of these guys. If you can, I mean, if you can, yeah, do that.
Go for it.
And again, I mentioned Devonta Smith as an option, but I don't even know if that's an option in some cases. Like some leagues would still be like, you're crazy. He's a 1 week rental. That being said, if your answer is no, he's going to be on my bench, then try to see if you can trade him for someone who will start, right? Like that's basically how I look at it. And I think if you can narrow that decision down and make it a little bit less emotional and kind of more rational and thinking like, well, where do I need a starter at running back? Do I need a starter at receiver? Is there a way I could package this up and make a trade to do something there? That's what I love doing too during the season is doing 2-for-1s, sending something like, I don't know, like even just to kind of pair the two, let's say Isaiah Likely and Jordan Mason, you pair them up for like a Sam Laporta. You know what I mean? Like something like that could get done. As crazy as that sounds, the Sam Laporta manager might be like, yeah, you're right. Maybe these two guys are the guy in redraft. I'm not talking dynasty. But in redraft, those kind of trades can happen a lot more often. And that's what I really like to do is free up a roster spot, which has a ton of value. And you can go pick up the next guy, like Dylan Lobe, like you were saying, or Jalen Wright, if he's still available or what have you. So you can kind of get on the next train and just kind of fold that value in. And as long as you're upgrading your lineup and your roster and your starting lineup, you're going to be better off for it. So that's generally what I do and kind of how I look at it, because your bench doesn't win you titles. I mean, the depth will get you there, but who's in your starting lineup is ultimately what's going to matter come weeks 13 to 16 or 17 if the league goes there.
No, I think you're right. Depth will help you win, and that's where I look at it. Like, what do I need in the next 5 weeks? Like, how long do I expect Jordan Mason to be starting? All right, Christian McCaffrey. Now it sounds like he has Achilles tendonitis. Might be out next week against Minnesota. Maybe week 3. Might be something he's dealing with. So let's say okay, let's say I expect to get 4 more weeks out of Jordan Mason the rest of the year as a RB1. What do my bye weeks look like? And so I'm a big fan of spreadsheets. So I've got spreadsheets for all my leagues and I map out each week of like who's on a bye, who do I need to fill in, where am I weak? Look at that. Then what I try to do, especially with trades, is I look at all my players each week and go, what would I sell him for right now? Without talking to anybody else, without looking at like, what is he worth? If someone says Jordan Mason for, and you can go players or you can go like draft picks. So let's say, is Jordan Mason worth a first round pick? Yeah, I'd sell him. Is Jordan worth a second round pick? Yeah. Is Jordan worth 2 seconds? Probably. Like, and where does that line cut? Like, how do you start cutting off? So when I go, if in my head, I go, okay, I think Jordan Mason is worth 2 seconds. And someone goes, hey, I'll give you 1 second. You go, right. I want to know what that value is for me. So I'm not back and forth and him and Han, because you only have a short window to get these trades through, right? Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday is really your it. Like you trades on Friday generally don't happen. Saturday never happen. So that's where I'm at. So I try to do that with these blow up guys. Like, what do I think their value is in a nutshell in whether it's redraft or dynasty? And let's say we're talking redraft. Like, what is he worth for the rest of the season right now? Like, where's my line? Like, let me rank my top whatever players. Okay, he's worth a Devonta Smith. He's worth a Mari Cooper, whatever it might be, and go from there. What do you do if you have a disappointment in week 1? What if you have a Drake London or a Trey McBride
Dalton
or
Kincaid?
Dalton Kincaid. Yeah, one of those guys like that. How do you handle that? How do you properly react to those situations?
Well, so first things first, I try really hard not to sell low on anybody. I tend to think, especially if it's just 1 week, you had your draft, you've got one data point. I don't think I'm dropping Drake London for Isaiah Likely, right? Like, let's be clear. Like, that doesn't make sense. Now, 2 weeks changes that calculus a little bit. 3 weeks changes it even further, right? If we see guys like Dalton Kincaid getting under 5 PPR points a week after 4 weeks, I'm dropping your butt. Like, get out of here. I don't need you anymore. I'll try something else. Of course, that will help everybody else that picks him up, because it never works for me, but it always works after I drop him. Anyway, that's just the nature of the game. But I think ultimately what I'm doing is I'm sticking to my guns. I'm saying, hey, I evaluated these players most likely just a couple of weeks ago or a month ago at the longest, Scott Fishbowl 2 months ago. But like, I evaluated these players at a time when I was not seeing any data and kind of trying to predict an inaccurate, predictable thing, an impossible to predict thing. I shouldn't be worrying about predicting it wrong. I put a tweet out earlier yesterday, I think it was. There was like, oh man, I should have started Baker Mayfield over Joe Burrow. Like, no, that's probably crazy. Now, I get some of the logic in those 2 exact examples, but the general premise is what I'm talking about, right? You don't usually start QB 24 in predicted ECR who ends up being QB1 over a guy who was QB8 who had a dud week. Like, that's just, don't beat yourself up on that. Lineups are always going to be a part of this game. I know that best ball takes that out of there, and I love that. I love the charity leagues that do best ball. Please do more of those. I'm probably more likely to join your league because lineups for me are just brutal on Sunday, especially if I'm going to a game. That being said, lineups are important. You got to pay attention, and I'm starting Drake London. I'm starting Dalton Kincaid. Like, I don't want to go too far away from this. Now, that kind of to counteract the other way a little, I will look at why they didn't do well. Was there an injury? Was there some reason? Was it the defense like taking away Drake London? Probably in that game, right? And they just focused all their energy on Drake London and Kyle Pitts, and neither one really had a tremendous game. Will that happen again this week? I don't think so. I think that both of those should be fine, right? And again, I'm speculating and wildly generalizing all of this stuff. But if your gut says something different, don't not listen to your gut, but don't be afraid to stick to your guns either. That's kind of where I go with a lot of this.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. Like, for me, we always say this, and you see this on Twitter, it's process over results.
Yeah. Yep.
And to me, week one is not one data point. It's just another data point into the data points I had from the offseason. So if I believed in someone in the offseason because my offseason prep, whether that's me doing the work or me listening to someone who did the work, either way is the same. If whatever process I use, and for me and you, we do our own process, right? That's part of being an analyst, is we look at these players and situations and go, okay, I have this guy as my quarterback 10, right? And Joe Burrow and Baker Mayfield's quarterback 28. But I looked at this week and said, hey, Baker Mayfield's a great matchup. Like, I started him in Baby Bowl in these one and done leagues because I liked the matchup. Where I can only use them one time a year, it was the best matchup. To me, week one is just an extra data point in the process that I've already done. And so if I'm listening to Dynasty Junkies or Bridge the Gap or, football guys or the fantasy footballers, and they're going, I'm wondering, I'm worried about this guy and we don't know, and maybe, right? And then week one backs it up and you can add that to a data point, then you can kind of refine your process. And it's just more data into the process already done. If you're just taking week one as your only data point, you're going to make mistakes.
For sure.
Because you just can't. You have to have more data, and there is more data. There's the preseason data, there's previous data. I will always take the guy who's proven it, even if it was last year. And like, again, once is a fluke, twice is a trend, three times a pattern. I'm okay betting on a trend, whether that's good or bad. Patterns to me are patterns, and that's what that guy is. If you give me 3 weeks of bad production, I'm pretty much done with you. I might hold you on my bench and hope you can turn it around. But when I see 3-4 weeks, half a season of bad work, or I see 2 weeks of good work, and then I might bet on it, and then you show me 3 more weeks of bad week. Okay, those 2 weeks were just a trend. There's probably other contributing factors into it. There is never one stat or factor that makes or breaks the guy. And that's when we talk about all these stats. All these stat guys will tell you there's not one stat that can predict the future. If there was, we would get it 100% right.
Oh, right. Best. How boring would that be, though? My God.
It would be super boring.
Predict the future sounds cool, but it'd be like ho-hum. Like, there's no fun of it. You have to have the ups and downs, man. Come on. That's
what makes fun. If I could predict the future, it wouldn't be fun, but at best, I'm hoping to be 60% right, like 70% if I'm really good. Like, I'm okay swinging and missing. So I'm okay trading away Isaiah Likely and then being wrong because I bet on Mark Andrews because Mark Andrews has proven it to me. Now, I like Isaiah Likely. I like his talent. I think the system's going to be good. So I might be a little more bullish on him and not sell him dirt cheap. And same thing when people have a bad week. If you have a bad week, what did my process tell me? When I look at some of these people and I go, the process was this. The process was this person was not going to be someone I wanted, and the process played that out. The process might be on a Drake London. He hasn't been stellar in his career, and the process for me was he's not stellar, and now he's got an upgraded quarterback, so he should be better, but I wasn't expecting top 12, wide receiver from him.
Yeah.
I was expecting decent. I was expecting slightly better than what we got, and same thing with Dalton Kincaid. I wasn't expecting anything from Dalton Kincaid. I was expecting what he got. I'm expecting him to get 3-4 targets a game, catch 2 or 3 of them for 40 yards. That's what I expect from Dalton Kincaid, because the process for me has always been the system doesn't utilize the tight end, and Dawson Knox eats up in some target share and whatnot. So that's how I look at it. If you're watching, thanks for tuning in. Remember to follow Andrew at Andrew Hall FF and follow Dynasty Junkie if you follow Bridge the Gap. Andrew, let's talk about a couple players specifically in week one and where you're at. What's your appropriate reaction for these guys? So let's start with A Raven we haven't really talked about, Justice Hill. Not a ton of work, especially in the passing game. Kind of seemed like he would be the number 2, number 3 target on that Baltimore Ravens offense. What's your reaction to what Justice Hill did on Thursday night?
I was shocked, to be honest. I think shocked is the word that comes to mind. I did not expect tiny little Justice Hill to be the guy that Lamar just kept dishing off to. Him and Likely were the two main characters that were in that play. And that blew my mind. I did not see that coming. I know I have Justice Hill in a couple dynasty leagues, but nothing of substance. And I don't think I have him in a single redraft league. So I was pleasantly surprised. And in PPR leagues, I'm definitely going after him. I think that he is somebody that could be flex worthy if we keep this up. They obviously didn't seem to have any interest in passing the ball to Derrick Henry. He was stuffed a lot and didn't get a lot of attention outside of the tackle boxes, and just kind of the Chiefs were able to hold him down. But Justice Hill got a lot of room. So yeah, I'm not saying I'm in on Justice Hill, but I'm willing to add him in place of guys that, like, for instance, like a Dylan Loeb or something like that, where it's like he was an inactive, Roshan Johnson. Like, I have him on some deeper redraft leagues like Scott Fishbowl and things like that. It's like, you go 22 rounds, you're going to have guys like that, but Justice Hill might still be out there. And maybe I make a pivot from someone like Velus Jones even. I'd much rather have Justice Hill myself. So yeah, I think he's a very obvious, in my opinion, waiver target this week.
Yeah, he's going to be like after Thursday, I think even after Friday, like one of the obvious guys that's going to go underrated on the waiver wire. Right, I agree with you. I'm taking him over some of these guys like a Ray Davies, who was like, oh, maybe he's something, and he ended up being nothing. Someone even like an Andre Yosavash for the Bengals, who I really loved, who I was hoping to be better and might still be something. But if I need the immediate help, I'll pick up Justice Hill. A shocker for me this Sunday was Ray McLeod.
Yeah.
Ton of work.
Yeah.
Guy who's been around for a while and has never really done much. He seemed like he was a serviceable flex play for you. What are your thoughts on Raymond McLeod? What's your appropriate reaction for that?
I mean, my appropriate reaction is I want to see it again before I start him. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if it's just one data point, and much like Justice Hill, it's just one data point. I'm not saying Justice Hill is start worthy now. I mean, again, depending on your roster, if you had all the injured players, then yeah. But Ray McLeod, again, the receivers, I just feel like are a little bit more hit or miss. They're easier to have big, huge weeks. I don't know if any of your listeners are familiar, but Sammy Watkins has notoriously had a terrific week one and then crickets the rest of the year. So I'm not saying Ray McLeod is that. I'm just saying I've seen that happen more often with receivers. And I think, too, with the way the modern NFL is and the scripting of plays and the way that you can plan for 3 weeks for your week one opponent and then only get 1 week after that. I mean, maybe there was just some fluky thing there, too. So I like it. I don't love it. I mean, again, I don't have any Ray McLeod, but I mean, if he slides through waivers and nobody grabs him, maybe it's somebody I'll spend $0 on or, get him off the first come, first serve kind of thing. But good for him. I don't know. I don't want to crap on the guy.
No, I don't. I mean, but the process for me for Ray McLeod was he's third, fourth on the receiving depth chart for Atlanta between London, Kyle Pitts, Darnell Mooney. Then it was like Ray McLeod is the wide receiver 3. Now, he had 7 targets, 4 receptions for 52 yards.
Yep.
52 yards is... like his best season was 243 yards. Like that's like an eighth of his best season ever in one game.
It's high. Yeah. No, I hear you.
Again, if I have an empty spot, right? If I'm holding on, let's say I had some guys, let's say I had a Puka who goes in the IR spot, and maybe I have a Crafty, he goes in my IR spot, and I open up 2 spots, and right, I can get him for a $0 bid, or I get him first come, first serve, not burning waiver prior to him. Yeah, I pick him up. I'm not starting him. And if he does it again, we'll see. And I think we saw this a couple years ago with Cordero Patterson with Atlanta. I think the fantasy community was slow to jump on the CPAT train because it was like, we've seen 9 years of him be nothing. And he has 1 good week. You're like, okay, that's a fluke, right? Once is a fluke. And you're like, oh, 2 weeks is a trend. Okay, I'll pick him up. 3 weeks he does it again. You're like, okay, now I'll start him for week 4. And then he went back to being Cordell Patterson after that.
And that's kind of why I try to look at just like, what do I know? What did I know before? Like, let's not deviate too far. It's one data point. Let's be careful. So yeah, I'm right there with you.
Now, this one is an interesting. What are you doing with Greg Dortch of the Arizona Cardinals?
Well, I don't know what to do with the Cardinals. I feel like Marvin Harrison was so quiet. Trey McBride was so quiet. It feels like it doesn't. I don't have the data to back this up, but it feels like the defense just took the 2 guys away that everybody expected, and then the other guys were open. And I think we see that a lot in the NFL, again, especially with week 1, where you can have plenty of time to game plan, and then shut down the best assets on the other team. Like we saw a lot. And this is very common actually in the NFL, maybe more so this year than most, but it was a very down week for offense, right? We didn't have a lot of, crazy offenses. The only one that I would even say was crazy was New Orleans, which is crazy of its own. And the fact that Olave got nothing of that, like it's just wild to me. That's what week 1 is. That's what it has always been. So like, let's keep calm and carry on. Let's put Greg Dortch on my bench and see if it happens consistently. But yeah, definitely same as Ray really for me, like happy for the kid, but I don't know if I can trust that. It just seems like fool's gold to me,
Yeah, I think there's some data points that suggest he might be good, like the fact that Arizona seems to not utilize their outside receivers a ton under this offensive scheme. We saw it last season. Again, I think he should be on everyone's teams. Like, if he should not be on anybody's waivers, he should be rostered. I don't think he should be started, right? I think you're right. There's that 1 week trend of the Bills, having plenty of time to game plan for Marvin Harrison, Trey McBride, Michael Wilson, and George kind of be the benefit of that. So we'll see what happens with having less time to prepare. But I think he should be a speculative play. I think if you got hammered with injuries, I think he's an okay flex play this week, but I'm not super like, oh my gosh, Greg Dortch is the number one receiver.
Yeah.
What about, we've hinted around Dalton Kincaid. How are you reacting to what Dalton Kincaid did week 1?
And the Bills are a weird team too, aren't they? Like and you're a Bills fan, you know this. Like I didn't know what to expect coming into this season, but I can tell you that I didn't expect Dalton Kincaid to be this bad, I guess, in 1 week. But at the same time, it's just 1 week. Like I think that they're probably just going to get their heads on straight. They're going to figure out the talent they have. They're going to, Josh Allen is a beast. Didn't he have 2 rushing touchdowns this week? Am I mistaken?
2 rushing, 2 passing.
Like, that's not going to happen as a Josh Allen manager in a lot of leagues. I loved it, but I don't think you're going to rely on that. And I think that's where you're going to see Dalton Kincaid pick that up as the 2-yard touchdown. Like that's very common for that Bills offense. So I'm not really freaking out too much about Dalton Kincaid. He's actually one of those people that I'm looking to acquire if I can in some leagues where I might need some tight end help. Just because I think you might be able to get him away from someone because they're just kind of like throwing their arms up going, I give up. Especially if that same person ends up getting Isaiah Likely tomorrow. That's kind of what I'm waiting to see. Because again, if the Kincaid manager is out there, freaking out, spending fab money on somebody like an Isaiah Likely, then they're clearly, in my mind, then trying to overreact and kind of showing me they're overreacting. Well, then I'll take the Dalton Kincaid off your hands. You're welcome. And I'll gladly sit on that and see what happens with it. So yeah, that's kind of where I land on a lot of this stuff is, I still think talent is going to win out in the long run. I wouldn't be shocked at all if we see Dalton Kincaid finish as a top 8 tight end at the end of the year. And this 1 week was just a blip, didn't matter. We see it all the time, especially at tight end.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been traditionally out on Dalton Kincaid. I think the Bills system does not utilize a tight end. I think Dawson Knox is going to eat into it.
I'm not entirely in on him either, but it costs.
Yeah, it costs. If you can get him cheap, I think expecting him to be a top 10 tight end is unreasonable on my opinion. Like I think he is a serviceable tight end, but I'm not expecting him to be a top 8, top 10 guy. I just think it's Bill's system. Today I watched the All 22 film because I wanted to know what was going on with Dalton Kincaid, and on his 25 routes, he was open for majority of them. And I saw some things that I said I questioned some things about him. I just think he's never going to produce high end unless Dawson Knox gets hurt, and there's some opportunities for him. There was some plays like he was looked at, but he didn't make his break quick enough, and Allen had to change because of pressure. And there's some things like that can be worked out. I think he could produce better. But if he gets more than 5 targets, 5 receptions a game, I think you should be super happy. That's how I'm looking at it. Same thing with guys like Drake London. Like, I think he'll be better. I think he's good. I don't think he's a top 10 receiver. I think he's fine. And I think the other one for us is Sam Darnold. What are we doing with Sam Darnold? Like, what are you doing with Sam Darnold? Because the narrative going in was Sam Darnold is Sam Darnold. We have a history of him being not good, but now he's on team with Justin Jefferson and, whatever we want to think of Jordan Addison, and he's got a good running game. And, what are you doing? Last one, what are we doing with Sam Darnold?
Well, again, in Superflex, hopefully somebody's already got him, right? Like if you're looking at Superflex, and again, unless it's a really shallow league, I mean, I'm throwing the whole kit and caboodle at him if he's available. That being said, in 1 QB leagues, I don't mind, especially in dynasty leagues where, you tend to roster 3 or 4, depending on what you're doing and how deep you are. I think Sam Darnold could be one of those guys that can make or break your season and could be somebody that you look back and go, man, I'm really glad I traded for Sam Darnold, which is an odd thing to say in the year of our Lord 2024. That being said, I'm not going crazy to go acquire him either, unless I've got some desperate need. Like you've got Jordan Love and you're kind of panicking, or maybe there's a situation where you only had Love in your redraft league and now you're looking at bleak outlook in 1 QB. You're looking at Malik Willis as obviously his replacement. Maybe you try to go out and get like a Jameis Winston to stash, things like that. And maybe the guy that's got Darnold is his third quarterback. Maybe you can sneak a trade or something like that. I do think Darnold is going to be the real deal this year, as much as, again, I hate saying that. I had high hopes for McCarthy just because that offense is going to be pretty good. I like Aaron Jones. I like Justin Jefferson. Who doesn't like Justin Jefferson?
Yeah.
You got Hawkinson, who's going to come back. I mean, I think Addison is still a beast. I feel like whoever's throwing them the ball is going to be good. So I actually do trust Sam Darnold. I'm not necessarily throwing the house at him, but if I can add him, yeah, that's worth it.
Yeah, for me, I think that's where I'm at. Like if I own one of these middling quarterbacks that I thought, like if you own a Deshaun Watson, who you thought was going to be, and he just hasn't been, and you're like, maybe I can just play matchups. I think Sam Darnold's fine. Sam Darnold, let me put up what I think is the baseline QB stats. For me, baseline QB is 250, 2-1. He put up 208, 2-1. Like that's what I expect. Like
that's right there.
Give me 15 points. Like you give me 15 points, I'll take somebody who gives me 15 points every week compared to someone who's going to give me 31 week and then 5 the next. So I think it's fine. All right, Andrew, before we get out of here, I've got one more question about this. How long do you give players to prove it? Like, how long are you going to give a Drake London, a Dalton Kincaid, another guy to prove it? Or even like a Ray McLeod, how long are you going to give them to prove it before you start them or before you just completely cut bait?
In my opinion, prove it is where we need to define what is prove it, right? Does prove it mean start worthy? Does it mean confident in hitting that checkbox or, putting him in your lineup? Is it confident? Is it like I feel excited about it? Or is proving it just like the data says that he is who we thought he was or that he is who he appears and that could still be a bench worthy player? For me, I think ultimately what it always comes down to is, am I going to start this player, right? And I think that's generally how things should work. I've mentioned it a few times on this show already where it's like, in my mind, if there is a roster that you have that is bad and is just going through injuries and you're looking at it like, man, Ray would make my starting lineup, then that's enough to prove it. That's already enough. Yeah. Go get him. I think that there are definitely some teams that I've had in the past. And luckily, not even though I had a bad week 1, I dodged a bunch of injury bullets. But I know that there have been some teams that I've had where after 1 week, I'm staring at my roster just going, I need to make something crazy happen because it is not working. And sometimes you just got to change the mojo. And maybe a guy like Greg Dortch or Ray McLeod, one of those guys after 1 week is what you're looking for. And you catch that lightning in a bottle and you get the Puka Nacua from last year, right? I think that's something, or was it 2 years ago now? But point is, like, you get that kind of value crazy fast. And if you think that that's the guy and you're listening to all of us and all of these analysts that are talking about numbers and APOE and all these other different numbers and letters and whatever, like all these crazy stats, and you somehow find somebody that likes him and you trust and you want to go all in, man, it's fun. Go have fun. Go do it. Go get it. I think that's all it takes for me to prove it. And I think too, if you're in a league where you get kind of crapped on for doing things like that, who cares, right? Just go have fun with it. And again, if you're a team that's suffering injuries, trading and maybe your only option here. Waivers may be your only option here. Like go do something. Just do something. Like the meme with the stick, right? You can't just sit back and take it, right? Go churn that bottom of your roster. Go drop somebody and pick that guy up just in case. So that's kind of where I'm at. And I think that's where it's going to be up to you what you think proving it is.
Yeah. I think for me, prove it is like show me, like I said, once is a fluke, twice is a trend, 3 times a pattern. Show me a trend, and then I'm willing to like make a judgment on you, whether that's good or bad. And then 3 weeks, once I get a pattern of what you are, then I'm willing to roll and I'll trust you. That's proven it to me. We got one last segment before we get out of here. It is a Mount Rushmore.
Mount Rushmore?
Yes, a Mount Rushmore. Andrew, we've talked about these games and we talked about you going to games. So give me your Mount Rushmore of stadiums or arenas. They don't have to be football that you want to visit. What are your top 4? Like, I want to visit these bucket list stadiums that you want to go to.
Yeah, unfortunately, I haven't been to that many, so this is an easy one for me. No, not easy, I guess, especially narrowing it down to four. I if I could pick any stadiums, I would go to Candlestick, even though it doesn't exist
Okay.
anymore, right? Like just old school stadium. But I would
Okay.
take Levi's. I'm fine with that. I feel like the 49ers have always been one of my favorite teams. I think it'd be really cool to go see that stadium. And again, I would pick the old Candlestick, but I get why you can't. It doesn't exist. I think that'd be a good one. I like domes a lot too. So I think I would
Okay.
probably go see the Mercedes Dome. Is that the one in Minnesota?
No, it's a U.S. Bank. Mercedes
US
is
Bank. There you go.
Falcons.
Yeah. So US Bank though, that stadium just looks really cool to me. Like that dome, the way that that's all built, and again, in the temperatures of Minnesota, like having that would be cool. The new stadium in LA looks amazing. SoFi Stadium, I think, is the one. That
Yep,
thing looks
SoFi, yep.
crazy cool. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't go see Jerry World. You know what I mean? Like I would love to go see, sit in Dallas and watch a Cowboys game. I'd have to wear a Cowboys jersey or something and kind of blend in. But yeah, it would be Levi's. It would be Minnesota, the US Bank Arena or US Bank Stadium, I guess is what it is.
Yeah, US Bank Stadium, yep.
And then SoFi Stadium and Cowboy Stadium for sure. The AT&T Stadium, I guess what it is, right?
Yeah. I agree with you. SoFi is on my list. Just the way they built that stadium, the way that it's open, or you kind of walk in and then you go down, kind of very much like Lucas Oil in Indianapolis. I think that's kind of a cool stadium. It's new.
Yeah.
It's got the big scoreboards. It's got these club boxes on field level. I think it'd be cool. I've been saying for a while, I really want to go to Soldier Field before they tear it down.
I've been there. It's
Soldier
great.
Field, like
Highly
it's just
recommend
one of
Soldier.
those,
Yep.
iconic stadiums. And it's going to be got a couple more years. I really want to go to Arrowhead.
Arrowhead would be cool. That's a
I've
good
been
pick.
there. I've been on the field, not during football. I went during the flag football game when the draft was there. It was really cool to be on the field. I just want to be there, like in the stands for a game and experience that. Like it's one of the loudest stadiums. I want to experience that. And then my last one, I'm going to take a non-NFL stadium. I'd like to go to MSG, like Madison Square Gardens, to see
That's a good answer.
a Rangers or like a Knicks game, like something in it, like just the history of that building.
Yeah, that's a good
To me, like
answer.
sitting with like
MSG
Boston
is
Garden,
just
like
so much history. Yeah.
there's just like MSG is like to me is I'm from the East Coast. I'm from Philadelphia. Like MSG was like the mecca of the sports world. Like everything that was big was that. Like all the big concerts were there. Like Billy Joel does a residency there. Like it's just it's
That's so
MSG,
cool.
right?
Yeah.
It's just the history of that building is there, and it's like downtown, right in New York City. Like that to me just has to be to go in there and just feel the history of that.
Well, for
building
Mount
is really
Rushmore,
cool.
that's a great answer too. I mean, that's just so much. That's a great answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think the new stadiums like SoFi is cool. I think Allegiant in Las Vegas, those are cool. Jerry World's a cool stadium, but I just want like the history. I've been to Lambeau. I really want to go to like even I thought about putting Wrigley on
Lambeau
there. I've
was
never been
almost
to
on there. I've been to Wrigley.
I've never been to Wrigley Field. Like I feel like I need to go just once because it's like iconic. Same thing with like Fenway. Like there's those iconic stadiums and parks where you're like, man, this is just so many things have happened here, and so many iconic sports moments and memories have happened in those arenas. I feel like you have to put one of them on your Mount
like
Rushmore.
Wrigley Field, there's the seat that Steve Bartman sat in. There's a sticker on the seat, so you know which one it is. Like that kind of stuff. Like you could go and kind of relive that. Anything on the Green Monster in Boston would be awesome. Like, yeah, I've been to the Fenway Park and all of that. That's a crazy stadium. Tons of good stuff to do there. But living in Wrigley, I got blessed to be able to go to Wrigley a bunch. That was awesome.
Oh, that's
Soldier
nice.
Field, great time. Go at least once a year. My wife and I always go to a game in Chicago. So those are great picks too. But Mount Rushmore is tough. Like there's just too many.
Soldier Field story. We were supposed to go. Well, the neighbor down the street, his son had his birthday, and he wanted to go see Messi play. It was Argentina versus Ecuador in a U.S. friendly at Soldier Field. So I was like, "Oh, cool! The four of us will go. The dads and the sons." So they didn't get here till like later than I would have left. It's a 3-hour drive. We get down there, there's gonna be traffic, and we're getting down there, and like the game's supposed to start at 6, and it's like 5:40, and we're like in standstill traffic, like literally right outside the stadium. So I said to the guy, I said, "Hey, why don't you take the kids, hop out here, walk up the street, and go in? I'll call you when." And they're like, give me the e-ticket, I have it. I'll go find a spot and come in. Drove for another 40 minutes where I think there's a parking lot. They go, "No, you got to drive down here another half an hour." Go down there. They go, "Oh no, we're full." So now I'm driving around like down Chicago looking for a spot, and by the time I find it, I couldn't even find a spot. And I looked at the clock in the game, and I put the game on ESPN on my phone. And it's now halftime of the game. And I haven't even found a spot. And the closest place I could find a spot was a half an hour walk.
Oh my goodness.
So I was like, I just called him and said, "I'm not making it to the game. Like there's no point." By the time I get to the park, walk there. We're gonna turn around and go. So I went to like a Jewel Osco because I had to use the bathroom because I'd been driving for like literally 4 hours. So I literally spent like 9 hours in the car. Never made it to Soldier Field.
That's brutal, man. That I will say this:
Brutal.
the thing that I don't like about Soldier Field is getting to Soldier Field is by far the worst.
It is the
I know
worst.
there are a few games I've gone to where we leave like the hotel or the area downtown where we're meeting people. We leave like an hour before we want to get there because you just need plenty of time to get there. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, now you've learned, I guess, for next time.
Now I know. So now I know if I go to a game, they say everybody just says take the train or whatever, and I'll figure it out. So maybe I'll get to a game this year. So Andrew, thanks for joining in. If you guys enjoyed this, hit that like and subscribe. Andrew, before we go, tell everybody one last time where they can find you, what you got going on this NFL season.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. It was a good time. And I'm glad we got to talk about some crazy reactions and underreactions all around the board there. But yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Andrew Hall FF. That's pretty much where I put out everything. When we go live for Dynasty Junkies, I tend to put it on there too. And then obviously come by, read my articles, tell me how bad they are, tell me how good they are, whatever you need. I always tell people too, like, I don't necessarily mind getting DMs and questions like that, but I'm also going to ask a lot of questions back. And I'd much rather teach you my process so you never have to talk to me again. And then I talk to the next guy and I do the same thing. So I'm definitely down for process questions. Tag me in trade polls. I love doing that and explaining some thoughts on that. And then again, if you're, just curious about what to do and have a team that you don't know what to do with it, we have Find Me a Trade as part of our Dynasty Junkies series. You can submit that through the Dynasty Junkies handle. It's a form where we look at your team and find a trade for your team as if we were managing it. And again, you've been on the show. You know how that's like. There's a lot of good value in that. So yeah, just other than that, just again, thanks for having me and looking forward to a great week 2 and seeing what we overreact from that.
Yeah, so can't wait for week 2 to start just in a few days here. We got Bills and Dolphins. So I'm excited for Thursday night.
That's right.
Again, we'll take that and we'll have an appropriate reaction, especially me as a Bills fan. Us Bills fans are known for having appropriate reactions to all things
clear of all tables
with our Bills. Yeah, tables, that's appropriate reaction. Jump through a table. I saw someone jump off a bus onto a table. I've said if the Bills win a Super Bowl, I'll jump through the table live on someone's stream. Like I'll go on live and I'll jump through a table if they win a Super Bowl.
That's worth it. That's worth it.
That's worth it. So thanks for tuning in, everybody. Hit that like and subscribe, drop a comment, hit us up on Twitter, follow Andrew, and we'll see you guys next week.